Excel workbooks. One thing to keep in mind is, as mentioned before, with Access and the Office Suite, there could be multiple versions of workbooks that you will be encountering upon. An older one, newer one. Don't forget to keep it preferably in the same version. If you're in the top version, you don't have to worry much about it because it's backward compatible, but not the other way around, as mentioned before. Another nice thing about sharing or importing data between workbooks is that the data can be separated in multiple worksheets. As you've seen, those tabs really come in handy to distinguish what type of data is named and contained within. We will also be looking right now for you a quick demo of how to import data from Excel workbooks. Let's start ahead in opening Excel as usual as a blank workbook. Once more, click on Power Pivot, your Manage ribbon button. Get external data, but this time around, we're not going to go into From Database. We're going to concentrate on other sources. Notice that still SQL Server appears, SQL Azure, Parallel Data Warehouse, Microsoft Access, Oracle, Teradata. You have multiple other sources that we're not even going to be looking into, but they are there readily available for you. For the moment, we're going to be concentrating on Excel. So we click on Excel File and the Next button. We're going to browse for a specific workbook, name the workbook as a data source. Clicking on it, we click Open. We test the connection. It is correct. And we also should check the Use First Row as column headers. I'll explain that as soon as we are completed. We click Next. And notice, it's indicating that there are two existing worksheets within that workbook. We can choose both. We could also preview and filter in case we're not sure, as in this case. And this is the reason I was explaining before why we should care about selecting the first row as a name. Because it's a workbook, it is assuming that there must be some sort of naming for this column. That is what we're doing too. Now don't forget to explore these options for you. By previewing, you can also do one thing. If you haven't noticed theirs, you could also select or unselect columns. This would be the place you can do that. I'm going to leave everything as is and just click OK. And lastly, finish it. Click Close. Notice that everything was imported correctly, the departments and the employee IDs. Let's go ahead and test that and roundabout back to the workbook. Going to Insert, Pivot Table, choose our external data source. Once we click Connection, you'll notice that the workbook is there available for us as a connection. Also notice that the tables are there for us. They always are. So we click Open, and once more, the new worksheet. Notice that since it's not that much data, we don't have to collapse, but it's easily selectable by the employee in the data. Text files. Well, considerations for your text files when you're importing them. They're usually comma separator. That doesn't mean that they have to be. They could be any other type of separator. This has happened more than once in the past. You've probably seen that some user might have saved the file with an apostrophe, double quote, or some other type of separator. Keep this in mind whenever you're importing it. If they haven't told you, you might have to go in there and scrub and look into the file itself to see what type of separator is being used, or you might be lucky, as most of the people, and just use CSV. Let's take a look at how that would work for us to our advantage in the demo. Okay, let's start opening the workbook once more and the blank workbook. Power Pivot, Manage, and Get External Data. You probably guessed already by now that from other sources would be the one we would be choosing. And you're correct if you thought so. We scroll all the way down and notice that it's not going to be named CSV file. It's going to be known as a text file. So you select that one and click Next button. This is what we were referencing to before as what type of separator we're going to be using. It could be space, colon, vertical bar, tab. We're just going to leave it as is, and we're going to look for that file. We have one little annoyance that is set by default for us. Notice that it's defaulted to TXT. We can click CSV and then it'll show up. So keep those in mind. If there is no extension, this usually works. Going to the text file name, text box, typing *.* and enter. That gives you everything. Should that ever come to your assistance or need, that is the way to use it. Click Branches. That is the file we're looking for, and click Open. Notice that it already went ahead and chose our data from there automatically. Let's click Finish and close. Our data has been imported into Power Pivot. We're going to extend and resize the column. It is available. And just to make sure that it is available for us in Power Pivot, let's switch back, insert a pivot table, choose our external data source. In this case, it's named properly Text Branches, and open. We'll import it into a new worksheet and click OK. There we are. Now, one thing that is not nice, what is F1 and what is F2? We don't know. Well, that can be a little bit of a nuance here. Let's go back into Power Pivot and change the name. You can change the name of your columns when needed. Going to name this branch name, so that gives us a little bit more a mnemonic thought pattern there. And double clicking here to branch ID. I'm going to resize it just to make it easier to view. And they seem to be properly named. Let's test that theory. Back into Power Excel and look. Notice that it was refreshed automatically. So now we know what we are choosing. Data feeds. A data feed can be usually used to be thought as an RSS feed. That is not to be confused in this case. We are talking about OData. It's an open data protocol. Without going too much into the fancy technical details of it, what you need to really keep in mind is any OData client can access any OData data source. Why is that important? For data availability. This protocol is being used to expose data to multiple sources, whether those are mobile phones, business intelligence, custom applications, cloud storage. It is attempted to be the standard to be used for exposing data to any client out there. It has become more and more popular and is being used lately a lot, particularly for SharePoint 2013, and other websites are starting to really leverage a lot of this type of concept. That said, let's go ahead and delve into a demo of how you would leverage OData to your advantage. Once more, let's start by opening Excel as a blank workbook. Let's go open Power Pivot and manage it, and get external data. We're going to go into from other data sources. And notice that there will not be a specific naming for data feeds. We scroll down, there will be an other feeds. And that's great. This is what we're going to be needed. But before opening it, let's take a look at the data that we would be trying to import. Let's open our browser. And as mentioned before, this is a link for the Northwind open data source out there. It looks a little bit garbled. It somewhat makes sense here. And that's fine. It works. That's all we really wanted to attempt. It's telling us that it is a services.odata.org version 3 of this database, and it's available for us. Now let's go ahead and confirm that that's the case in here. Let's go back into Excel and click the next button after selecting other feeds. Notice it says data feed. Let's complement it by saying Northwind data feed. Let's enter the URL we're talking about and test a connection. It succeeded. And in case we ever need more details of how this needs to be configured, we could click on the Advanced button. There are multiple properties that could be leveraged here, but we're really not going to be using them. These are just to show you that there is more than meets the eye here for us to keep in mind. We click OK, and next. Notice that it selected our data tables already. A lot more than the ones we have in Access. If you notice, there are more there, and it's because, yes, there are different versions. The Access version and the one in OData have some differences. Not that it matters to us much, but it's something to keep in mind if you want to go ahead and play with it. We're going to choose the order details and click Finish. It's importing. And 2,155 rows have been transferred. Let's click Close. And there they are. All of those are included in here. Let's go and test this to make sure that we're not on the wrong path. Let's insert a pivot table, choosing our current source, which is Northwind Data Feed, opening it in a new worksheet. There we are. Let's drop some product IDs and unit prices. They are summed in there already for us. As mentioned before, SharePoint is also one of our possible lists, data sources, or connections where you're going to be retrieving data. This would be achieved via OData. As we mentioned before, it's an open data protocol, and SharePoint 2013 uses it heavily. One other thing to keep in mind is as SharePoint as a platform can also be used to share, host your Power Pivot within itself. In other words, you can have a Power Pivot site that hosts via a document library your workbook without having the need to have Excel to display that workbook within SharePoint itself. They can view it if that's all it's needed. They can also open Excel on their desktop via SharePoint itself and allow the user to interact with it. Let's take a moment and go back to see how we can explain this much more clear by delving into a demo. Let's go ahead and open Excel, open a blank workbook, and go into Power Pivot. Click Manage, and get our external data. Before we go ahead and open from other sources and retrieve our data itself, I want to show you that we have a SharePoint site already existing with a list called Departments. This list is the one we're going to import into Excel Power Pivot itself. Nothing fancy about this list, just named departments, and has human resources, finances, information technology, sales, and marketing. Of course, I already know the URL, but we're going to use a specific convention that I'll explain at this moment. When I click down into other feeds, just like we did with OData, the same applies here. Notice that I'm using a specific convention here. This is for SharePoint itself. I'm telling it to go into the API of SharePoint, the lists, and get by a title a list called departments. And at the front, we're telling it this is where the SharePoint site exists. To make sure that things are working fine, we just test the connection. We could also name it here accordingly if we like. And click Next. Notice that it recognized the table, the list, and it's calling it items, just like that. Because it's coming from SharePoint, there are a lot of columns that are not easily identified or viewed within our site. So for that effect, we're going to go to Preview and Filter. And notice we have a lot of columns, as we had mentioned before. GUID, attachments. Let's unclick what we really don't want to see. The version, editor, author, when it was created, modified. We really don't need all that information. In case you do need, you can check it again. Content type IDs, ID numbers, other ID. We're just going to leave an ID and a title. We're going to click OK and finish. 5 rows, which match exactly as we've seen in our browser. We left inadvertently the editor checked. That's not a problem. And let's go and see if this really is what we were looking for by adding a pivot table. We'll choose our external data connection, which recognizes, as we named it properly, department SharePoint list. The tables, it's called items. We're going to open it in a new worksheet and click OK. We're going to look at the titles only. And there we go. It is readily available for us to interact with Power Pivot. Analysis services. One thing to keep in mind when we're using analysis services is that our cubes should be previously populated. Why? Our data professionals most likely have taken care of that. If not, it's strongly encouraged to talk to them and have them help you do so. It is very similar in a fashion that you just click on the other connection and choose your server along with the cubes and measures KPIs that exist in the cube itself. It contains a lot more data than a relational database because it's used for drilling through and digging deeper into data. This is much more easier explained with a demo. Okay, let's open Excel, a blank workbook, and let's go into Power Pivot. We click Manage, and this should look familiar to you. Get external data from a database, but now we're going to use from Analysis Services or Power Pivot. I'm, as before, going to use a period just to indicate it's a local server. And as soon as we click the drop-down, we get the other databases, the other cubes available for us. In this case, we're going to refer to AdventureWorks Data Warehouse. Going to test the connection. It is successful, and click Next. If you're thinking we're going to type an MDX query, you are sadly mistaken. We're going to make it the easiest way with choosing design. As mentioned before, it could be overwhelming the amount of data that is available in a cube. So for that effect, I'm going to reference to a KPI, and I'm going to focus on products gross profit margin. Doesn't seem like much of it came through, and it's because it has to be compared with also products. Notice that we get some more columns. We click OK, validate it, and click Finish. 39 rows were successfully transferred. We click Close, and we notice that we have data available for us within Power Pivot. It's also named Query. We could name it a little bit more specific and to indicate what type of information it contains. Products gross profit margin. And we're going to go switch back to Excel, insert a Power Pivot, use our current external data source, which is Analysis Services, open it in a new worksheet. Notice that we have multiple columns here. We're going to choose the last one just to make it easier. We can even mix and match a few others here. And notice we have our products here available for us. We can click, unclick as we desire to our better needs, and they are grouped to our advantage depending how we want to organize them or even analyze them. In this case, it's really up to us. This is a much better fashion. The product manufacturer and the gross profit margin, as we can see here. Combining data connections. By now you're wondering, we've opened at least 2 or 3 connections easily on our own, but we haven't put them together or even thought about doing so. Well, that's going to change. We're going to be looking at why we have a single source, which we have in the previous demos and slides, versus a multiple source. Why would you want to even bother thinking of these ahead of time? Well, as mentioned before, a lot of your data might be coming from multiple sources. It could be a relational database, it could be a cube, it could be one of your coworkers' Access database, or even workbook. That also varies by industry and company according to corporate policies and many other variables that we might not even be aware of. Bottom line, most of your data models will be a mix and match, a mixture of multiple data connections. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's even better because you'll be able to utilize all of that data together to even go further down and drill down all the analysis of your data in a single way. Let's take a look at a demo to give you a better idea of what we were talking about. Let's start by combining the Connections Final workbook. Once it's open, let's go into Power Pivot, Manage, and when it's getting ready to load, you notice that we have all of our connections here existing for us. How do we know that they come from the same or different sources? You click on Get External Data on existing connections, and notice that here it is clearly indicated that they definitely have multiple connections within the workbook. And not only that, it comes from multiple ones: SQL Server, Access, Excel, a CSV file, 2 OData sources. And that's fine, nothing wrong with that. They're existing there. Now let's put this all together into one single pivot table and see how that would work for us. Let's run back into Excel and insert a pivot table. We'll use any of these connections at this point in time. Branches will do fine. We click Open, and we're going to do it on a new worksheet. Notice that we have branch, and that's great. But what about the others? If we click on all, that changes quickly. Now we have our list departments, product categories, departments, customers, and categories available to us. Let's see what happens when we add one. Let's add a branch name. That's great. How do we relate that to a customer or department? Well, you're right ahead. We don't have a way to relate them. And that is one of the problems that can arise if you don't have a column that matches or can relate to another one. That makes it difficult to get data to be comparable and be analyzed. So keep that in mind whenever you're doing it, because you can run into this problem. Notice that while it's being grouped, it doesn't necessarily mean it has been correctly related to the right records or data.